MYB community, thank you for coming back for episode number 218 of the Minding Your Business podcast, entrepreneurship, real estate, trending news. There's no business like minding your own. Woo, what a weekend. We're recording this on November the 9th of 2020 on a Monday. What a weekend. There was an announcement of the 46th president of the United States. I'm sure that everyone is growing brain cells back on this Monday after probably drinking all week. Hopefully I'm kidding. Hopefully you weren't doing that, but everyone watching election results. And so now, as far as we know, we have the next president of the United States. And we'll kind of see what happens between now and inauguration. But as I've spoken, just know that you still have an opportunity. If you're listening to this right now today, you still have an opportunity to continue to strive towards your goals. And just remember, whoever's sitting in the Oval Office is not going to be sitting with you to help strive to reach your goals, right? Your goals are your goals. And so whether that turns out to indeed be Mr. Biden, or if that somehow that finds out a way to continue to be Mr. Trump. Either way, your life is still going to continue to go on, and you still have an opportunity to be the very best for yourself, for your family, and for your community. Subscribe to the podcast, 5-star, wherever you get your pods. Helps us continue to grow the MYB community. I'm excited about today's guest joining today. Jodi Hume is joining us. She is a decision support for entrepreneurs, and we're going to talk today on some important areas in terms of making decisions in your business, and how Jodi does that with her clients and with her prospects. But it's very critical. We talked about this on several different episodes in MYB about having support. You're not going to go through, anybody that's successful is not going to go through this journey alone. Okay, you're not going to just solo fly to success. And if you study anybody that's been successful, one thing, there's a few things that you won't hear. You won't hear that it was the cocaine, right? No one's going to get on TV and say, no, you know what, Ron, if it got, the thing that got me through was the cocaine. I attribute all my success to, if I sniffed cocaine all day, I would be highly successful. You won't hear that. And you won't hear that they went about it alone, right? You won't hear Jeff Bezos say, you know what, I did all this myself. Right. Or Elon Musk or anybody else. Right. And so that's what it takes. And so Jodi joins us today to share her background and again, how she helps entrepreneurs just like you to be just a little bit better. So Jodi, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jodi's a podcaster herself, and we're going to talk about that too, because we love here at MYB Jodi to support other podcasts. And so her podcast link is going to be in the show notes, so you'll be able to check that. But I want you all to do so and leave subscribe and leave a 5-star positive comment on her podcast as well, and let her know that you heard her right here on the Minding Your Business podcast.
Definitely.
So yes, so thanks so much for joining. Let's dive right in if we can.
Sure.
Tell us, who you are and how you got to, your journey pathway to get to what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I have an answer to this question that I've always used, long before I started doing interviews that is absolutely true. And I'll get to that part in a second. But very, very recently, someone said something to me that, sort of holds a mirror up and you're like, oh my goodness, yeah, that's right. And that is that the work that I do now, this sounds a little bit silly, but I feel like I've literally been doing this since I was 5 or 6 years old, because I grew up, my mom was an entrepreneur for most of my childhood. Her two parents, which, her father was an entrepreneur and her mother owned her own business in the 40s. She had an insurance agency in the 40s and the 50s, which is kind of unheard of. So entrepreneurial. Yeah, I know. I mean, that part is not a shock to me. I knew that I had sort of grown up in this entrepreneurial soup, that it was not an unfamiliar thing to me. But, I hadn't really thought about the fact that, dinner tables and car rides and just my entire life was, often there were entrepreneurial conversations going on around me. And my mom included me. We did not grow up in a hide the real world from the kids kind of household. and she would talk through things with me quite often, even when I was tiny. And some of the things that I often find myself doing now, which is, these like diagnostic questions to separate facts of a thing from fictions and fears and the story you're making up. And okay, that part's true, but that part you're starting to like make up about someone's intention or what you think is going to happen 8 steps down the road, or just that troubleshooting kind of diagnostic work. I remember asking my mom questions like that when I was like riding in the car, tiny. So I guess in some ways I've been doing this forever.
For a long time.
But at the same time, it is also true that there is not a single thing that I get paid to do in this business right now that I even knew existed until I was like 32, 33. So this was not a thing I set my sights on and, strategically plotted my path forward. I think like a lot of people, I went to college. First, I was an engineering major. Then I switched to psychology. I was going to go back to grad school and become some sort of counselor or something. And I got a job at an architecture firm right out of school. And I had planned to stay there for 6 months and then go back to grad school. And I stayed just shy of 17 years.
Good grief.
Yeah, I know, right? And but it was an absolutely extraordinary experience. I couldn't have handpicked a better grad school, for lack of a better way to call it. I got thrown into a really unique situation. They were tiny when I started, about 8, 10 people, something like that. I was the receptionist for about 3 months, and then the marketing person quit, so they gave me that job. And because I was the marketing person, I got to sit in on the leadership team meetings every single Monday.
Yes.
And so starting at 23 years old, for 17 years, I was part of those conversations and decisions as we grew. And over that time, we grew to close to 50 people. They're now in the 60s. But so I saw a lot of ages and stages and processes, and we made mistakes and we fixed them, and then we learned from them, and then we made more mistakes, and we did a lot of things really, really well. But I was in those meetings. And again, I didn't know facilitation was a thing, but just because I think a lot of times in life, what you're here to do is what you can't not do. And my version of I see dead people is when people are talking, I can see where they're talking past each other or where they think they made a decision. But I remember the very first time 2 of the principals of the company, the owners, thought they had made a decision. And one of them was talking about a person and one of them was talking about a project. Wow. And they thought they had just decided and come to an agreement. And I was like, hold the phone. Like, you did not just come to an agreement. And so that's how I got into facilitation and then ultimately coaching. And for a number of years, once I left, I did coaching, business coaching, life coaching, a blur of the two, because I don't know how anyone separates them. I think that's ridiculous.
Right.
And and then I really came back to what has always been the core for me, which is this decision support. I think coaching has its place. I think consulting has its place. I think therapy has its place. And more often than not, it comes back to what you said in the beginning. It takes a village to do a lot more than raise a child. It takes a village to raise a business. And a lot of times people just don't have someone to talk a thing through with, whether it's because they don't think they have someone who understands the problem, or because there's a reason they're embarrassed to talk about it, or it feels like something they can't share because everyone who could be helpful has a horse in the race. And so they're not objective. I mean, there's 100 reasons why they don't have a place to take it. And Seth Godin has this great quote that if you have a problem you can't talk about, now you have 2 problems.
Yes.
And so all the work that I do now is to keep people from having a second problem.
Right. That's interesting. What's something that's interesting with what you said, Jodi, in your experience that I think a lot of people can relate to, and I certainly can, is you were in boardrooms kind of early in your career. And I was too. And I think one of the benefits of having that is, like you say, you got to see the stages. You and I are alike in this aspect, in that when you're kind of get a chance, you get to see kind of how the sausage is made, so to speak, at an early age in your career. And you get then the benefit of going through the different life cycle stages.
Yeah.
There was a time where you were probably clearly the youngest person in the room.
Oh,
right?
by far.
I was as well. I mean, I remember being in my early days, and this is in the banking industry where, I'd be in the room with guys that were 85 plus years old. I remember being in a board meeting, a very important meeting, right? I was maybe 23. I was a year out of college. I was going through the management trainee program, and I'm in the boardroom in this meeting, and they're making a pretty significant decision. The most important guy in the room falls asleep. It's like a 2 o'clock meeting, right? So it's after lunch. This guy clearly had taken his medicine,
Oh
right?
man.
And he's falling asleep to the point that he's leaning on me.
Oh no.
He's so asleep, and he has this light snore, right? It wasn't loud, like to interrupt the meeting, but he's got this light snore, and he starts kind of leaning. I'm sitting next to the guy, and Jody, he starts kind of leaning a little
Oh
bit, kind of
no.
like on me. So I'm like, dude, like, wake up, man. And he's the guy that's got to, like, this is the guy that can say yes or no to
Oh my
whatever's
goodness.
being discussed, right?
Yeah.
And so there's
Yep.
all, and in banking, everybody, there's 100,000 VPs at these
Sure.
big banks. Everybody's VP of something, right? I used to joke that there's probably some guy that's VP of the wall sockets.
Right. Yep.
That's all he does,
Yeah.
right? And so this guy's the one that can say, no, yeah, we're doing it, no, we're not. And so he basically he just tanks just about the whole meeting. And so as it gets towards the end, he gets up and he's like, "Hey, young guy, what do you think about all this?" It's like, what do I think? What do you think? You're the
At
one
least
that's
you're awake.
so I'm a young space cadet, Jody. So I'm kind of,
Yeah.
so I start to giving him kind of my cliff notes as to what I think, and he's like, so he goes, yeah, I think that's right. I was like, how do you know? You were asleep through the whole damn thing.
Yeah. No, it's I don't think there's been a single time in my life where if ever my age comes up that I haven't lied that I'm older than I am. And I still do that actually, because
Yeah. I mean, it's but see, now I'm, like I said, I'll be 40 in January. So I'm getting to the point now where I'm not, I'm kind of in between, so I get to where, like, I'm not the youngest, not the oldest. I'm kind of right there in the middle.
Yeah.
And so, but like I say, you go through those years of kind of being, the younger, kind of young gun, so to speak. And it's just interesting as you go through those cycles. And I think that helps shape that outlook that you already had from a young age, coming from a family that was accustomed to, risk taking, and had, a risk assessment of themselves that they're willing to bet on themselves. And I think that the spirit of that conversation, if you compare that to someone that, who doesn't come from that, they come from, like you've talked about, things have to be very settled, right? And we have to know, okay, we make X amount, every Friday or every other Friday we get this and that. And so, we plan off that.
That's actually, I love that you said that, because I don't know that I've ever actually, I had that awareness kind of in the foggy, fuzzy way, but I don't know that I've ever actually, it's been articulated in a way that I was that aware of specifically like people who are willing to take risks. Yeah. And it explains just like a weird trait of mine that I actually think of it from the outside. It looks like some sort of like bold confidence, but that's not actually how it plays out. It's almost more like a glitch where throughout my entire life, and I can very quickly tell you my earliest memory of this, I just do a thing, like I say yes to a thing, and it's not always, again, it's not because I'm like, I'm confident, I'll figure it out. Although it sort of, because I did this on accident a few times, I think it sort of built into that my awareness that I'm good at figuring things out even when I don't know what I'm doing. But in second grade, my teacher held up a mimeograph. I don't know at 40, I don't know if you're old enough to remember mimeographs.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. I might have just missed it.
Okay, I'm 47, so somewhere between you and me, they fell off the radar. They were there were these papers. It was a version of like a Xerox kind of, but it was a different technology. They somehow used water. They were like moist and purple, and they had this very specific smell. Anyone who's my age is now having like a nostalgia memory because these were very distinct. And she held up this paper and said, does anybody know how to use the mimeograph machine? And I was like, I do. And I stood up and I took the thing and I walked into the teacher's lounge. I don't even know. I guess I wanted to go in the teacher's lounge. I don't know. Right. But I can tell you this moment, I take like 3 steps into the teacher's lounge. And I remember just feeling this like tsunami of terror of, oh my God, I don't even know which one's the mimeograph machine, not to mention how to use it. Plus I was extra tiny, so I couldn't even see. I had to like get a chair. Anyway, I figured out which one was the machine because there was a mimeograph in it. And I managed to figure it out because here's the thing. In that moment, it's not like, again, like I have some huge, bold risk, tolerance or whatever. I had just put myself in a situation where the only thing that was more scary than figuring out how to make it work was going back into the room and telling my teacher that I had no idea how to use the mimeograph machine. That was far more scary. And so I figured it out. And, does it always, does that, I won't even call it a strategy, but does that glitch or whatever it is always work out super seamlessly? No.
No.
But the reason they gave me that marketing job was the owner came through and he was like, "Do you think you could do Martha's old job?" And I was like, "Sure." I knew nothing about marketing. I knew nothing about marketing architecture firms. I mean, I had my work cut out for me, but I think just saying yes and then trusting that you can figure it out is one of the most important entrepreneurial skills that you can have, because lots of people because trust me, I now hear the private conversations that very advanced entrepreneurs are having in their own head with themselves. And I am here to tell you, they do not know what they're doing either. They are often terrified and uncertain and feel like, just soaked in imposter syndrome. And so if ever that is what's getting in your way, you got to get over it, because that never goes away. It never, ever, ever goes away. You just got to plot forward.
You just have to plot forward. Yeah, no, it definitely, that certainly makes sense. And it's an intriguing thought with what you do, and kind of tying this all together, Jodi. So as you come out of kind of this corporate world, and you start your business as a side hustle, and then you go full time. One of the things that I get the question all the time, and you probably do too, and many of you listening that work with others do, is, that how do you know when to go full time? For me, my hand was kind of forced, right? Mm-hmm. I was doing it on the side, and then I had there was a merger that my position was eliminated, right? And so that kind of propelled me like, okay, now's the time. So I take that as, while it's rough, it was easy because, like I say, my hand was forced. What am I going to do? Right. Yep. And I kind of was just kind of thrown in the frying pan. Others, may not quite have that luxury. They're trying to decide while they have an income coming in. Right. And that income may be satisfying the debt and the bills and allow them to have their lifestyle. So, how would you answer that, Jodi? If someone came to you and said, Jodi, how do I know? Right? How would I know when it's the right time?
I will answer both questions. I will tell you what I tell other people, and then I will also very quickly tell you what got me out the door. And they're a little bit, though they're not that different, but they are kind of different. But it really speaks to the breadth, I think, of how you come to these moments. Yeah. And so one thing, I am not a big fan of, if you build it, they will come. Just like forging out there and assuming that it will be great. That absolutely works for some people. For some people, the pressure of, well, now I got to make it work because everything's on the line, really brings out something important in them, and it works. In my experience, that doesn't work for a great deal of people. Having that pressure to deliver and to live off of what you're trying to create really constrains most people to a point where, they're not getting their best thinking skills. I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience behind this. When you are stressed, you don't have access to your highest thinking skills and your best nuance, creativity, and whatnot. And so, and I'll say, from a sales perspective, when you appeal, people can sniff desperate from 100 miles away. And if you're like, buy my thing, because I really need you to buy my thing, that is not attractive. It's not. And so
that's true.
That's why I'm a big fan of the side hustle, and, creating a cushion for yourself so that you can step off, not from, 100 to 0 and try to make it work. That being said, it is really, really, really hard to, in a side hustle, create a horizontal latitude stretch, especially if you have a pretty decent job. Getting to the point where there will be no financial dip is really ridiculously hard, because you're working with only so much time, and it's just simply not Not that it's not possible. It is
Mm-hmm.
possible. But if that is the line you're looking for, that's probably too far out there.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit how I held it. For me personally, so I also met my husband at that architecture firm.
Awesome.
And so he was, he's now a principal of that company. He wasn't when we met. As my daughter said, she goes, "You married the boss?" I'm like, "Well, he wasn't the boss when we met. Like we were both
You
young
dated the
and
boss.
I know, right?" I was like, we were both like, he was an intern and I was like right out of college.
Yeah,
I was like,
old and nepotism.
I know. I was like, he wasn't the boss at the time. But by the time I left, he was one of the principals, and he likes to say that he fired me. That's his favorite story. And the thing is, he's not entirely wrong. I really struggled to make that break. Like, I wish I could tell you, this is not a place where I have this like super brave story of I just did it. I struggled to make the break, in part because of the fears, but in part because of the cushy salary and flexibility that I had, but also because I really felt invested in the company. I still refer to it as we quite often when I talk about them. I loved the people. I really felt like, I had been a part of growing it from 8 to almost 50 people. And so I had a lot, and I was terrified. I can articulate this fear very specifically. Sure. I was terrified that because it was a really great place to work, that if I left, that I would realize that like no place is as great as this place, and I wouldn't be able to come back, and I would regret it forever, and blah, blah, blah. So there came a day where I just had it about something, and my husband and I didn't talk about work at work very often at all, but he saw me in the hall and I was all upset, and he pulled me into a conference room and he's like, "What's happening?" And I told him like it was one of those things. It wasn't a big deal, but it had just like sent me over an edge. That's something stupid. And he's like, "That's it. You're quitting." I was like, we can't. I'm not, like, my income's not to it. He's like, "I don't care. You're never going to quit on your own. I'm going to go get the other owners right now, and you're telling them you're quitting."
Right.
So that was an extraordinary gift to have a spouse that supported that. If I had a spouse at home that was like, "Honey, you can't quit. We need, I would like to think that I would have quit eventually, but it definitely would have been harder. And I don't want to step over how hard that is. It was hard for me, and I was being kicked out of the nest. Yeah. And for the next couple months, like I cried the last day I was there packing up my stuff. I was like, "Oh, I hope I'm making the right decision." But I can tell you, I have there has not been 1 hour of one day where I ever questioned the decision. It was like the gum had lost its flavor for me. And in fact, when I was like packing up my stuff to pass on to another person, I realized that I'd actually done that job a disservice in staying. Like I probably should have jumped ship a couple years sooner and let someone else take over those things. But you can get lots of advice in how to make that jump, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that if it's feeling hard for you, it's because it is a very hard thing.
And oftentimes it's the right thing. When you feel kind of that extreme nervousness, and like I said, a little bit of pressure is good. Like you say, not to the point that it becomes
not survival pressure.
Not where it's so debilitating that every conversation, every opportunity is, completely hinged to, all of life. I mean, it's kind of like those movies, those end of the world movies where, everything rides on being able to shoot the cable from one building to the next or something like that. Yeah. It's like, like all of humanity rests on this one guy in a plane going up to the aliens, right?
Absolutely.
Like in real life, that doesn't work. Right?
Yeah. And I will tell you, I work with a ton of entrepreneurs over the years who don't have a financial obligation. Maybe their spouse, makes quite a lot of money and they don't really have to deliver. They struggle to get their businesses where they want to. Like there's a lot of value in constraints. It's finding the right size, like the Goldilocks amount of constraints. So, you don't want to risk your kids getting booted out on the curb if you can't make it in 3 months. You have to give yourself some on-ramp time. You will. I'll tell you, in that first year and a half of being off, I was really struggling with where I was used to bringing in X amount of income, both because I not only had my whole salary, but then also my side hustle stuff. So I felt really good about what I contributed.
Yeah.
And so getting rid of the salary, I was still contributing something, but it didn't feel important. It didn't feel enough to me. And
Yeah.
I was actually shocked by how much that bothered me. And my husband, again, a really lucky moment where I said, well, this is my 8th year in business. I should be, but he's like, hold on. It is not your 8th year in business. You were doing it on the side for 7 years.
Right.
It's your first year in business, and you wouldn't be holding yourself to this level. And I was like, okay, fair point.
Right.
So, it's deciding what ruler you're using for yourself in any given moment is another important part of it, I think, because
Yeah.
you need that pressure to bring out the best in you, but not so much pressure that it's a 2x4 you're whacking yourself on the head with, because that doesn't serve you either. So
Yeah, exactly. Jodi, along the same line, and then I want to get to kind of what you do specifically with organizational leaders.
mhm,
Um, but I'd love to get your thoughts on this, just in regards to uh, that whole thought process of kind of when to start, when to make that jump. I've always been of the mindset that if you take your salary, right, and kind of two things here, take your salary. So if you make 50,000 a year and you bring in, I don't know, 4,000 a month, right? Just use that. Once your side hustle, if your side hustle starts generating you 2,000 a month, so
mhm,
roughly 50% of your monthly income, now it's time for you to go.
mhm.
That's just one aspect of many,
Yeah.
right? But
Yep.
one of the things that I share people is if you're making half of your salary doing it part time, think of what when you invest the other part of your time, and you're gonna exceed that. I mean, it's just
Well,
the
here's
math works that way.
no, I love that. Here's another little trick that I did that got me over that. Because if I'd been trying to do what I did exclusively in the evenings and weekends, I would have, I really would have been on the low end of what I was bringing in on my side hustle. If for no other
Sure.
reason, then that's not when people are available for,
Right.
for doing the
Yep.
work I wanted to do. Like,
Yep.
for some
Exactly.
of them were, but so, I got really creative with my job. Two things. One, they had an extreme rule against part-time. They were mainly because being a part-time architect doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And
It doesn't
so,
really work.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and there aren't, I mean, some places allow that, but it was just against the culture at the time at my firm. And I wasn't an architect, but still they just were very hesitant to open that door and set that precedent where then they would have to start having that conversation with other people. And so I got super creative, like and at the time it was a little bit of a detriment to me, but it bought me time during the day, which I valued more than the dollars.
Sure.
So what I did first was I said, well, here's what I want to do. Pay me hourly. First of all, we switched to hourly, and I will only work 30 hours a week, but I'm still going to get everything I got done in 40 hours. And we'll give it like 2 months or whatever. I said 1 month, 3 months, whatever it was. We'll reevaluate. If you feel like I'm dropping the ball, we'll figure out where we go from there. But I want to do some of these other things. And they're like, so hold on, we're going to pay you 3/4 what we did before, but you're still going to do everything. And I was like, yeah, I think I can do it. And they're like,
Okay.
okay. And I did it. Like, I mean, I really systematized some things. And then I ultimately actually even moved it down to, I think, 25 hours a week to pull off, because one of the other kind of zany things I did was I outsourced some of my work. I
Hmm.
paid other people,
Yes.
some of the administrative stuff that didn't need me to do it, that like once I trained someone, they could do it. And so I was actually spending some of my salary to pay other people to do some of my work.
Right.
And those were ways that I built that bridge a little bit, because I could charge more for the work that I was doing in my side hustle than per hour anyway.
Yes.
So, it takes some of that like really creative and not getting hemmed in by just sort of the status quo can help to bridge that gap. And I got to tell you right now, that is a skill that you will continue to need in business.
Right. Of
Figuring out
course.
scrappy, resourceful ways to make things work
Absolutely.
is what growing a business is all about sometimes. So,
Yeah, it definitely is. And I appreciate that, Jody. The second part of that is, entrepreneurship. So,
mhm.
something that, that doesn't happen as much in the banking industry, but it does certainly in the credit union industry. Um, and there are other industries that are probably like this too. I'm surprised. And as we wrap up 2020 and go into 2021, that more people do not look at how they can start their business within their company. That really shocks me, given everything that's going on, and particularly this year, as companies have had to be more adaptable, pivot more, and be a little bit more open-minded and creative. So like what you just described that you did kind of in that role of hiring outside, that creativity and that ability to kind of pivot and kind of map out what is going to make sense and work. I think companies, even at larger sizes, are having to do that. They're having to get out of that minutia of, this is the way around. We've always done it since 1865. And, so they're getting out of that. Right. And because some companies die over that.
I'm not absolutely. Anything.
My great-great-grandfather William the Fourth did it this way, and this, this is
and
how
that is
exactly
the voice they use when they say it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's where I got it from. All those years in boardrooms of hearing.
I know, right?
So it's interesting now that people don't, like, they work for these large companies that have gaps all over the place that a small business can, they have vendors all over the place. And so I tell people, it's like, where do you think these vendors all come from? Like, and you have the advantage of being on the inside. So like when you go to these trainings and you're talking with your bosses and your supervisors and all that, versus feeling that, and it maybe again, it goes back to that fear, Jodi, of, well, I don't want, if they feel like I have other interests, they might look to do this on the job or maybe take my job from me. So there's all that
does happen. I mean, like some companies
are
very vindictive about you having any kind of outside interest. They can be very possessive, and so it can be a hard, a little wire to navigate. But I hear you. I'm surprised more people don't do it, and I think a little bit of it comes back to what's really a false sense of security, that somehow a job is more secure than having your own business. And sometimes it is. Like, I get it. Like the fact that paycheck comes every single 2 weeks or every, whatever the frequency is, there are some perks that you can get, benefits that you can get that you wouldn't be able to get or would have to pay a lot more for. So I don't negate parts of that, but I just, the number of people I know whose job has just been eliminated, or the company decides to go a different direction, or there's just not, I think being really honest about how much security there is where you are is an important part of that too. Cause I think that gets overblown quite a lot. And then it creates this sense of safety that's not actually as safe as it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that safety piece, but then also I think that there's, like you say, there's that fear piece. And like you say, you have to understand the culture of your company. Yep. But I think a lot of companies are open to, particularly when it's going to benefit them. Oh, yeah. I think really where they frown upon outside stuff is when it doesn't benefit them and they feel like they lose because you're devoting attention or time that they're paying you for on something that doesn't benefit them.
Yeah, they're not big fans of that.
Yeah, of course not. Right. Nobody in anybody's company is going to benefit that. Even for those of us that are entrepreneurs, no one's going to want a company where I'm going to pay you for something while you're doing something for somebody else. Yeah. Nope. But what they will do is, I think that, if you can understand where a gap is in a company, right? And a lot of times that, you go to these robust trainings that are within, especially these large companies, and you just talk to people and you just kind of find out, like, it's kind of like in sports, at some point, you're not going to be able to cover everything. You can't account for everything, right? Yep. No company can. Whether it's Amazon, Tesla, you name the company, there's a gap somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. And so then is there an opportunity for you to fulfill that gap and have your company be your first client?
Yep.
And
I have a client who did that. She was an events person for a Fortune 100 company. And she just simply, her biggest motivator was her kids were getting to an age where she wanted to be home at 3:30 when they got off the bus. That was her biggest motivator. And that was not possible when she was a full-time employee. So she started her own thing and talked to them about it. And they were like, well, you already have, this part of what you do, we want our inside people doing. But like these 5 events, you've got them, you could do them with your hands tied behind your back, and they were her first client. So her jump was hardly a jump. It was a mild leap.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I remember, being, in the C-suite of a, organization, and, the number of vendors that I met with and paid was just unreal,
Yep.
and it wasn't a huge, kind of banking operation, but it was sizable, right? But it sparked that thought, Jody, that it's like, all these guys and these weren't all like big corporate companies. I mean,
Right.
a lot, probably 75% of them were entrepreneur, small business people who did
Right.
different things for our operation.
And whatever that thing is, if you look one chunk size company smaller than wherever you are, like if you work at a company that has a full-time IT person or a full-time events person or a full-time marketing person, a size or two below you, they need they need somebody of your expertise, but they can't afford, and they do not need a full-time you. They
Right.
really need they need a sliver of you. Like, I mean, I certainly have that. Like, I need a sliver of this person. I need a sliver of that person. I need a sliver of that person. And
Right.
that's where sub-consultancies really come in, and where you really want someone smart and strategic and who knows what they're doing, but you don't need them full time. It doesn't make
Right.
any sense.
Exactly.
And so going like a tiny bit down a level or two, there are probably the companies that need exactly what you bring to the table, but just a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think opportunity can come. And so, yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that, because I think a lot more people in MYB, if you're listening to this, this could spark some thought for you if you're working at an organization currently, is that there could be opportunity for you to start your business within your current company. And you'll be surprised what they'll be open to if you have a plan and you can show them, like anything else in the world, you
Yep.
can show them, how it benefits them. Now, if you're putting something together that's going to have no benefit to your company and it's
Right.
just going to be you and someone else benefits, then I would likely advise you not to
Right.
share that. Work and then determine when that time frame is, if that's what you want to do, or do both together. But yeah, I think there's opportunity there. So Jody, for you, through your vast experience, how are you working with leaders today? Obviously, coming into this year, I don't think either of us knew that there was going to be a worldwide pandemic, right? And
No.
that was going to stymie a lot of things and open up opportunities in some other areas.
Yeah.
But, so how are you working with your clients and prospects today? And what are you seeing different in maybe their mindset or mentality,
Yeah.
kind of pre-COVID to this, the current pandemic that's going on now?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been super aware of this kind of continuum of how comfortable people are with uncertainty.
Yeah.
Some people really want to have it all laid out and feel like they know exactly not only the next chess move, but they think that they've predicted the next 7 chess moves. And then some people are much more comfortable, as they do, like building the plane as they fly it and figuring it out as they go. And I'm definitely more on the other side. Like I can be a planner, but I'm also, I sort of plan out key chunks of things and then navigate in between them. And, what I saw in March, especially March and April, I'm pretty sure I heard from every single client I've ever had in the entire world wanting to talk through especially some of those initial decisions and you just really felt that continuum, the one end of it like paralyzed, frozen, because what did not ever exist in March and April and May was anything you could base certainty on. There was just anyone who was looking for some kind of certainty to make decisions was paralyzed. I had one person call me or send me a text actually and say, do you have any do you have any good like blogs or podcasts or places where there's like recommendations on best practices of how to handle this situation? I was like, and I laugh, but I'm not making fun of them, like, because that's how paralyzed they were, is they just couldn't even see past their want for security to see that there is none. Like, where do you imagine the best practices of how to handle a global pandemic? Like, no one's ever made these decisions before. Like, you are. And so it sounds weird, but what I was telling people a lot was, look, you're going to make some decisions. Some of them are going to be wrong, and that's okay. Like, lives don't hang in the balance here for some of this. Like, you have to, there's this amazing thing that I have actually fact checked with a real live NASA person. And this is actually true. I read somewhere one time that the space shuttle is never, ever, ever on track when they're sending it someplace. The only way they can ever get it anywhere is to constantly course correct it. And the minute that they like it to the left, they immediately have to figure out when they're going to like it back to the right, because that's how they steer it. And that's really what entrepreneurship is about, is just getting really good at course correction. And so also I think part of that is learning, they don't shift the space shuttle and then walk away for 6 months, so I think one of the things that really helps with discerning decision-making skills is make sure that you're right sizing the time frame. So when I would facilitate leadership conversations, especially in like the spring before people kind of found their sea legs, they were trying to make decisions that would last through like the end of the year. I was like, guys, let's maybe shoot for the end of the week. And they're like, well, but we need to tell people, they need to know. I was like, no, no, because it's all going to keep changing. And so it's one of the things that I hope actually gets woven into the fabric a little bit, is a little bit more ease with that kind of adaptive. And to be super clear, I'm not against planning and I'm not against being like long-term strategic, but you also need this like facile, adaptive, make decisions as you go. And so my work now is still a lot like it always has been for the past couple of years, which is I took what, I think I used to consider like business coaching and life coaching and consulting, and what I sometimes joke is like business therapy. And I used to do that like most people do, a certain number of sessions a month or some sort of package or program. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I nixed all that and I exclusively do on-call support. So it's because stuff happens, the stuff doesn't happen on every second Tuesday at 3:00. And it's funny. I saw in your bio that you're a cheeseburger fan, so you'll appreciate this analogy. But,
absolutely.
There's a number of times where, so my clients, I train them to call me when ... And so whether they're spinning their wheels or they're just feeling run down or they're just not feeling it, sometimes they're having the burn it all down days or whatever it is. If they're bumping their heads against the wall, if things aren't moving forward, they call. And it is this diagnostic process of just asking some questions, digging in, and being just, overwhelmingly curious and not assuming I understand anything. I'll be like, well, wait, why is that? How's that feeling? And I got to tell you, there's a certain number of times, and this is a really big thing right now.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just so exhausted that they could, this is what I always say, why I thought you'd appreciate that. My joke is, and this is what I say to them, I said, you're so tired right now, or just run down or depleted. It doesn't always feel like tired. You are so run down right now that you couldn't decide between a hamburger and a cheeseburger. If I asked you, they're done. And and that's a thing that I absolutely learned from, there's a kind of tired that my mom gets, that it's no longer about what she thinks is the problem. I'm like, nope. You're tired and you need to get a good night's sleep. And then let's talk about this tomorrow. And invariably, after a good night's sleep, or with some of my clients now, a couple days off, somehow to renew and keep your energetic capital high, then they know how to solve their own problems a lot of times. But so having that other person watch you parallel park your car, I think is part of the value, to be like, you are hitting the curb there. You got
those are
start over.
Tremendous analogies for sure. I love those. Yeah, and being able to determine. Now, I don't know if I ever have that issue of trying to determine the difference between a hamburger and a cheeseburger. I think I could always make that call.
You're like, why would anyone pick a hamburger?
Right. Even if the world is burning down, I'll be the one guy say, I'll take it with cheese.
Cheeseburger, please.
That's tremendous. And as we've gone through the pandemic, I think it's challenged that very psyche. I think it's opened the door for those owners that have the courage to adapt and to pivot and to understand that, like you said, that there's not going to be this certainty. That's what even the last week with the election results, where people were, it seems like leaders and people that were stressed about it, it's because they want the certainty. I got to know who's going to be the president, and what is that going to tell you? Like,
Right.
other than whatever
And this,
ideology you
I
follow.
found it particularly interesting since literally for weeks ahead of time, everyone was like, now just everyone be really clear. We're not going to know. We're like, I know, we're not going to know. And then
Yeah.
once they're like, why don't we know yet?
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost
And the
like
thing
with
is,
kids, you're like, didn't I tell you this is exactly what was going to happen?
right, exactly. And the thing is, everything is it's all relative, right? It's,
Mhm.
well, I'm holding out so I can know what taxes are going to be like. Listen, dude, we're getting ready to send out like 300 something million doses of a vaccine. Your taxes are
Right.
going up no matter who's sitting in there, right?
Yeah.
Your taxes are going up. Um, so, I mean, so like things like that people are waiting on, like, well, I'm waiting to see what's going to happen with capital gains tax. Nothing. It's gonna it's gonna be what it's gonna be no matter who's in, so
Yeah.
the thing that people, again, they have their own personal ideologies for things, but even just from a bit, there's nothing immediate that's going to change,
Yeah.
or even in the 4 years with, so again, to your point of this certainty, right, that everybody's grasping for it. And that's what people, when they say get back to normal, really what they're
Right.
saying is get back to where I can plan
Yes. Yes.
outward, is what they're saying.
And this is why sort of this having someone in your life who can diagnose the problem you think you want to work on is really, really important. Like, it doesn't have to be me. There are lots of people who can just ask you some curious questions before. Like when I run roundtables, that's the rule. Like somebody put their problem up, and then for the first period of time, you're only allowed to just ask them questions, because you really got to get down to it. And one person wanted to talk about this last time about how to encourage his people to work in the office instead of working from home. And so we were all like, well, wait, so why do you, like, what's at stake? Because we're trying to find like the solid ground, because nobody
Right.
wants to lead from the like, because I said so kind of way, so we're like, well,
Right.
so we were trying to find like, well, what's the justification that like makes it fair? And it was so funny, because at first it took us a little bit to get there, because your spidey sense starts to tingle. You're like, I don't know that there is solid ground here. And then there just came this point. He goes, all right, there's really no reason that they need to be there. I just feels better to me if everybody's there.
Right.
which here's the thing though, that does not invalidate that as a real thing. Like, as an owner, that matters. Like, he's feeling depleted because he gets energy from his people being there. Like, he's having trouble pedaling the bike of the business because he's feeling depleted, because he feels disconnected from people. So it's not like it's not a problem, but it's a different problem than how do I enforce, or whatever you phrase the question of, like, how do I convince people that they should be in the office? You're like, well, it's
right.
different question that we have to, and it's just not quite the right problem to be working on. And so many times you ask a couple of questions, and really the problem underneath the marketing problem they think they have is like one tough conversation they're not having, or you just dig a little bit and you're like, oh, okay, there's actually a different problem here, and you fix that one and the other one goes away.
Yep, absolutely. So it's interesting, just that whole dynamic, for sure. And so tell us some about the podcast, and kind of the discussions that you have there, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so Elliot's a lawyer, and he and I hear, he and I both are privy to a lot of conversations that other people don't hear. People talk to us about stuff that they don't talk to other people about. And he and I have a really great banter. We both love metaphors and stories and whatnot, and we always have, and we would always enjoy these lunches and whatnot we had together. And but at one of those lunches, we were really both a little bit frustrated, or just sort of sad for the world of business, maybe is a better way to say it, because we both hear these stories, and over and over again, like, people, they feel like they're broken, or that there's something wrong with them, or they're not good at leading, or whatever. And it's just because other people don't talk about. So they think they're the only person who has that problem, when I've heard that problem 3 times in the last week. And the same with Elliot. He's like, no. And it reminded me kind of almost like imagine if no one told you what was going to happen to your body at puberty.
Oh, good
And then
grief.
all of a sudden those things start happening. You would think that
Yeah.
you were a mess, or
Right.
I'll be honest, if you're a girl, you might think you're dying.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, what's
So
going on?
yeah, exactly. And I feel when in fact that's just what happens at that stage of development, and it's totally
Right.
normal, and it's expected. And on the other side of it is a different, through this phase of growth, there's another set of part of your life on the other side of that. And we
Right.
saw that all the time. And so we started the podcast. It's called So Here's My Story. And it's just Elliot and I. We don't have guests, but each week
Yeah.
one of us tells a story. And sometimes it's a business story. It's not always a business story. It's just a good story. But if it's not a business story, it's because it has a metaphor kind of baked into it that you just kind of feel to bounce off of. And then we just discuss how that applies in business and what matters. And we're slowly trying to reveal a lot of these conversations so that people don't feel so alone. And, both of us feel really strongly it should never be lonely at the top.
Right.
And so we just want to share those stories and help people realize that they are not broken. They're not dying.
Yeah. Right.
And that other people have these issues as well. So,
Yep. Absolutely. And so the podcast is called So Here's My Story.
mhm. Yep.
Yep. And so,
Yeah, I have the easiest way to find it, because sometimes it can be hard to spell it with the apostrophe or whatever. So I have a page called leadingclarity.com where you
yes.
can find links to the podcast. Towards the bottom, you can find links to my work, but there's actually, I feel so strongly about this, having people to talk to. I'm beta testing a kind of at scale, small program, because I normally only work with a handful of one-on-one folks. And so I'm doing this test of like, how much can you help someone in 20 minutes to half an hour? As a one-off conversation. And because I have a team of coaches that want to start offering this. And so we're offering that. Anyone who listens to these interviews can schedule one of those calls. And I want to be super clear. Not only is it not a sales call, but I literally will not discuss working with me on that call. Like if that's something that interests you, that has to be a different call. This is just 20 to 30 minutes that if you have an issue that you don't have someone to talk through with, you can see what it's like to have someone to bounce those. And the only thing I ask is that if it's valuable, that you like shoot me a little note so that we have that to kind of check it out. And if it's not, sorry.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So far it's been very valuable. So.
Yeah. I look forward to checking it out, Jodi. And I've already subscribed, and MYB, I encourage you to do the same as well, to go ahead and subscribe. And like I mentioned earlier, leave so it's 2 parts. You have to leave a 5-star your response, but then a positive written comment. Don't just hit the 5 stars and walk away. Leave a positive comment. And then that helps Jodi and her team be able to grow that audience. Yeah, so definitely do that. So I look forward to checking that out and providing feedback for sure. Jodi, as we wrap up, because this has been a fun and very informative dialogue that we've had. What are just 1 or 2 best practices that have worked for you personally that you think will help those that are listening? So someone that's listening to this podcast, when they get done listening and they go back to whatever their world is, what are 1 or 2 things they can take with them that have been beneficial for you that you think will be beneficial for others?
Yeah. So I think one's sort of a mindset thing and one's more of a specific doing thing. And so the first one is being really strategic with your time. And I'm not talking about time management. There's a million ways that works. That's lovely. But just really deciding what's most important and carving out time for just that, which is so much easier than it sounds. But I know whenever I am, the first sort of entry to that is whenever I feel like the last thing that I can do is stop and pause and like take stock or clean my desk or get organized, or, whenever I feel like the last thing I can do is like pull back in some way.
Yeah.
I have a really disciplined, fierce rule that I have to trust that is strategically the smartest thing that I can do is when it feels like that's the last thing that I can do. And I've never regretted it. And what I will wrap into that is also, that includes what I like to jokingly call strategically playing hooky. There are times where I just feel really run down and like I don't have as I said, the sort of the gum of everything has lost its flavor for me. And there's a kind of like blah-tastic that I feel sometimes that, again, even when I'm super busy, I will take the morning off and go for a hike, or go to the guitar store. I don't do that now, the pandemic, but I used to like go play with guitars or whatever. Like just, it feels indulgent. Again, have never regretted it. I always come back freshened up. And I will say, when all of this pandemic first hit, I had one client who, when literally everyone was like white knuckle gripping, trying to figure out what to do, she went away for 3 days. She like, and even I was a little bit like, oh my goodness, like, wow, that's a brave choice. And I will tell you, she came back from that 2 or 3 days that she was gone with a plan, and she worked it, and she had this energy, and she was clear, and she pulled her business, which was an incredibly impacted business, out of the skid faster than anyone I saw. And she has, again, in an industry that has not fared well, she has actually come out on top. And obviously it's not all because of that 1 3-day thing, but I just saw her get traction faster than anybody else.
Yeah.
And so my second thing is more of a mindset thing or an awareness thing. And it comes back to, it sort of starts off with the awareness that every solution comes with its own set of new problems. And so that I don't find super helpful, just because it feels too logical. But here's the part that I often sort of giggle about and then find my center again, is what that means is that progress often means that you have new problems. Yes. And so if you're just in the old problems all the time, that's bad. But if you're encountering new problems, it sounds really silly, celebrate them. Like like my team and I will literally be like, hey, this is a new problem. We must be making progress.
Right. No, it's true.
It doesn't feel like that in the moment. You're like, oh my God, a new problem. It can feel really heavy. You're like, oh, that's a new problem. This must be progress.
Yep, exactly. You know, that is a good mindset piece. Even as we're laughing about it, because it is funny. But
laughing is also a very important part of entrepreneurship.
Yep. Oh, definitely. It's very therapeutic.
For sure.
But yeah, I love that notion of it, Jodi, that seeing problems, not just for the impact and through the negative lens of something that you have to deal with, but every level is going to, like you say, is going to incorporate its own roadblocks, its own obstacles. Right. You're not going to just elevate through levels and it's just going to be this smooth ascension. Right. Every level has its own challenges.
My favorite one is when somebody says, oh my gosh, if I can just get to this place where I can hire my first person, everything will be better. And I'm like, so some things will absolutely be better. Right. But having people work for you is its own whole other layer.
Yes, exactly. Like, it opens up a whole other can of concern and things like that, a whole other can of risk. And then, like you mentioned, you hire your first person. Then what happens when you hire your second?
Or you hire your first person and it goes amazingly, and then you lose them. I mean, it's just that, like, if you can't embrace that vibe of that, it's going to change. You're going to like, if you're looking for the coast in entrepreneurship, I would really question whether it's the right path. Like, if you can't love the problems, I have this friend who talks about pick everything in the world has problems that come with it. Nothing is perfect. So like a really great life skill is pick a thing with problems that you like solving, that are fun for you to work on. And so if it's not fun for you to kind of figure these things out, then there are other ways to make money than entrepreneurship that don't come with those problems.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too. I think that's a great kind of third best practice that you shared, Jodi, is, when you go into business, or, if you're looking to pivot, is to, look for areas that have problems you enjoy solving. Right. It goes back to, and I relate this back to your story of when you were young and you were kind of going through, this period where you're learning and to counsel and kind of, help people through that decision-making process even early on. Right. Those were problems that you enjoyed. Right. You enjoyed having those conversations. So it had a level of fun and intrigue for you that kept you engaged.
That's what my mom said. She goes, there was a reason I talked to you about those things. She was like, you were good at it. Like, you were helpful.
Right. Exactly. I
wasn't doing that as a training mechanism.
Right. Yeah. You were good. Even from that point, you were good at that. And so that's a good encouragement, I think, for those listening, is that, go into areas that have problems that arise that you enjoy solving, because and all of us have that. Like, when you think about, all of us have our strengths and all of us have our things that we enjoy. That that's another piece of it, is that all of us have problems that we do enjoy solving,
Mm.
right? It's a matter of what are those, and how do those incorporate, or do they incorporate with what you do, whether on the job or as a business owner. Because like we're saying, you're going to have problems on either one. Right?
And they
There's
don't feel like work as much. If
Yeah.
you actually like them, they don't feel like work. Whereas like problems that I don't want to solve, like that's just drudgery. Like,
Right, exactly. That's a good point. So, Jodi Hume's our guest today. She is the decision support for entrepreneurs, and the host of, or the co-host of, So Here's My Story podcast. And tremendous value today. I really appreciate this conversation, Jodi, and you taking time to have this with us. And everyone can go to jodihume.com. Is that correct? To kind of connect with you and.
Yep. Yeah. There, or either one works, jodihume.com or the leadingclarity.com.
Yeah. Leadingclarity.com. Yeah. So both will be in the show notes, NYB. So visit both sites and subscribe to the podcast. And please do so. And if you reach out to Jodi and her team, let her know that you heard her on the Minding Your Business podcast.
Yes, please.
Jodi, listen, best wishes to you and your family. Thank you for what you do to help support the community around business ownership and entrepreneurship. Oftentimes that can be sometimes a thankless job, I can imagine, because it's easy to take information, just kind of run with it. But thank you for doing that, because it helps sets the stage for everybody. And as the world evolves into whatever it evolves into, we know that entrepreneurship, business ownership, and that transition around the workforce is always going to be there. And having folks like yourself to help navigate, the viewpoint of it and help navigate making decisions, I think is really going to be critical as the world evolves. That's going to be one of the critical pieces of, of living that cannot be automated, right?
Yeah.
And I think people need to take stock into that very quickly. What Jodi said, which was very powerful, was having someone like her and others to help, talk through and kind of guide through making decisions as decisions become more complex, and more integrated into other areas of life and impact more people. In a lot of cases, you don't need to fly solo on that. You need not so much even a co-pilot. You need another pilot with you.
Yeah. No, and I would throw that thanks right back. I mean, you're such an important voice in this space, and you're really helping people not be alone in this journey that they're on. So tip of the hat right back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And listen, enjoy the rest of your day. We'll remain connected. And if you find I can be a resource, let me know.
Great. Thanks, Ron.
All right. Thanks, Jodi. Take care.
You too.
Yeah, that was Jodi Hume, NYB. Make sure that you check her out. All the links are in the show notes, and really do that. When we have guests on this podcast, we like for you to connect. It provides resources for you as you grow and as you see opportunity, and you just never know when opportunity can take itself. And so you have to take the first step. So take action by doing that. Okay. All right. As I always like to close the show, there's and more important than ever after what took place this past weekend and what will continue to take place as it relates to the presidential election and that sort of thing. And there's a lot else going on other than that, for sure. But there's three things that unite us all, no matter where we're from, no matter what side of the tracks, no matter what your ideology is, that sort of thing. There are three things that unite us all. And we all look to be just a little better for ourselves, a little better for our families, and a little better for our communities. And if you can keep that in mind with everybody that you interact with, and if we all can practice that, we'll all make this place just a little bit better for all of us. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can always catch me, champronbrooks.com, where you can engage with all of my ventures. You can listen to other episodes of the podcast. And you can communicate with me there. I'd love to hear from you, as I always do. I love hearing from the entire community, good, bad, and ugly. So thank you all so much. Thank you again to our guest, Jodi Hume. And listen, go be great, again, for yourself. Be great for your family. Be great for your community. Take care.